What's going on, people? Welcome back to the Uncensored Critic podcast. They've been away for a while, but we are back with a very special episode with another GSA counterpart, and that is, of course, Mr. Matthew Coulton, who's been teaching myself and my group all about the work of Jacques LeCoq. Now, if any of you have listened to any previous episodes of mine, we had another GSA person on there called Sabs, and Sabs talked about her own personal experience with working with Jacques LeCoq in Paris back in the day. And it's really interesting to hear what Matt's got to say about his side of Lecoq's training and what more we can uncover about his work. So let's take a moment to introduce Matt, or whatever you call him. So Matt, despite sounding like Michael Sheen and coming from Cardiff, he actually comes from Yorkshire. So I remember the first day I asked you, "Are you from Cardiff, Matt?" You went, "No, I'm actually from Yorkshire." So I was like, that's insane. So heading from Yorkshire, Matthew graduated from Central's Complicité Associated Bachelor of Honours Acting, Collaborative and Devised Theatre course in 2014. His work as an actor includes credits with Theatre by the Lake, the Chester Storyhouse, and a #1 tour with Leicester Curve and Rose Theatre Kingston, and BBC TV and radio. As a physical theatre specialist, Matthew has performed in The Magic Flute alongside Simon McBurney with Complicité, The Winter's Tale with Rory Kinnear and the English National Opera, and as choreographer and movement double for Timothy Spall in Stanley, A Man of Variety with Stephen Cookson. As a puppeteer, his work includes work at the Lyric Hammersmith, Pins and Needles, several tours with Slot Machine Theatre, and R&D with Blind Summit. He has also worked as a movement director on numerous shows, including 3 off West End 2020 award-nominated productions. He is associate artist for So Goes It Theatre, a new diorama emerging company in 2020, movement director for Pendy Shakespeare Festival, and regularly teaches Lecoq technique at the Actors Centre as well as GSA. Alongside Lynn Johansson, he is co-founder of Artistic Rebellion, an interdisciplinary UK-Swedish devised theatre company. Their work has featured at Fertility Fest 2019, at the Barbican, and at the Varberg Festival in Sweden. So yes, that's a very movementy CV you've got there.
I could probably cut it down a little bit hearing it.
Yeah. No, keep it along, man. And it's a good. Yeah, you must be proud of what you've achieved so far. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, I've been quite fortunate, and I carved out a niche, I guess, in the movement aspect of things, and that's sort of gone well.
That's very well. Yeah. What was it like studying at Central on that particular course, the Collaborative and Devised Movement? What was your experience of that?
I loved it. It's quite a recent course. We were the 7th year doing it, I think. Yeah, it was the 7th year. And I really enjoyed it because the course doesn't give you one way of doing things or one practice, or it gives you a whole exposure to a whole range of different techniques and processes. And Jacques LeCoq's very much the kind of cornerstone of that, and most of the teaching staff were ex-Lecoq graduates themselves, and of course it has that association with Complicité, who are themselves Lecoq formed company, so that very much is at the center of the work, but it covers Stanislavski, a bit of biomechanics and Meyerhold, Suzuki, everything that you'd expect to cover, and lots of extra things as well. So it gives you a wide palette, I would say, as a performer.
Wide palette, that's good. I just got a few questions about, actually, before we jump into Lecoq himself, about, I said on here with Sabs, actually, before we started everything, I just got an image of her, just at a busy tube station or at London Bridge station. And I just imagine her looking at all the different ways that commuters would just be moving, even if it's like subtle movements. So I don't, forgive me, but with yourself, I see you especially just walking through Regent's Park on a busy Saturday afternoon, and you're looking at all the different aspects of human life. You've got families, you've got friends, you've got people throwing frisbees or people chasing after a dog or something like that. And you're going, oh, that's really interesting. How can we incorporate that specific movement into something that's very complicité or something like that? I mean, am I talking complete nonsense there, or is that something that you actively like to get involved in, like observing things?
Oh, very much. I mean, it's been known to happen that I have consciously gone to various parks, I think including Regent's Park, to do such observations. And I also think it's part of the I don't know, maybe this is a bit too general to say, but part of the kind of actor's curiosity about the human condition or about life in general. We're always sort of, but both externally and internally, like, oh, what happened for me at that moment in time? I remember reading, there's a brilliant Japanese actor, Yoshi Oida, who has a really interesting career path. He trained in very traditional Japanese forms of theatre and puppetry, and then spent most of his career working with Peter Brook in the West, in France and the UK, and various international tours and so on. And so his journey has been really fascinating. And there's 1,000,001 anecdotes in his various books, and one of them is he had a moment of heartbreak, I think it was, or something that left him in deep distress and sort of crying his eyes out, and he caught sight of himself in the mirror and went, so that's what that's like. And I think that's just part of the kind of actor's way of being, is noting that externally and internally.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I'm just going, you mentioned there when you were at Central, you'd actually encountered some people who actually come from the LeCoq school in Paris. So did you know if they actually, like, if they worked with the man himself, what did they say about it? Did any of them actually work with the man?
Yes, most of them did. Our course leader, Catherine Alexander, one of our other primary LeCoq teachers, Ali Colonia, both trained with the man himself. And we had a couple of other LeCoq graduates, but I can't remember where they would stand on the timeline, whether they had Jacques himself. And we also had John Wright as our clown teacher, who's very much comes from the same tradition. Yes, in terms of what they would say about the man himself, that's a very good question. No. It would be quite a common theme, I think. He'd be very hard to please taskmaster, from what I could tell. Not taskmaster is maybe the wrong word, but like it certainly wouldn't give way to praise very easily. It would take quite a lot for him not to go, that didn't work, or that's my second-hand impression in any case. Maybe not to the extreme that you kind of hear about with Gaulier's sort of clown school, where he is not to everything, but certainly, it's hard to please, but also very open. I think, that he didn't impose a way of doing things. It was more, here's a range of tools to explore to see what happens, and for you to kind of take ownership of that ultimately as an artist in your own right.
Well, that's interesting, because I remember Sam, who actually worked with the man himself, she said something very similar. She said he was very, very hard to please, and I think towards the end of the episode I asked her, was there ever a moment where he actually sat down and just said, okay, you guys did well there, like at least some sort of credit? And I think I need to listen to it back, but I think she just went, no, not really. She might I think she said that he might have gone, okay, that was better than before, but this isn't, no, this isn't right, but which I suppose, I don't know if that is a good thing. I think if you do get some sort of praise from him, that means that you've actually done something pretty damn well, and that's great. But right, so let's jump into LeCoq himself. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. So I suppose first thing for yourself, what was your light bulb moment? What made you want to work specifically with movement and work with LeCoq's work?
I think the very first moment I was sort of opened up to physical theatre and visual theatre was watching Slava's Snow Show when I was a teenager.
I remember that, yeah.
I just thought it was utterly magical. I went on a school trip and I was just like completely agog with joy and surprise, and that definitely set me on the path of being interested. I also did a little bit of mime studying when, again, extracurricularly at sort of outside of school when I was quite young, and then I did National Youth Theatre course And my course was with a practitioner called Neil Callaghan, who works a lot in very sort of physical and imaginative approach. Not necessarily, he wasn't a LeCoq graduate himself. I think he was from what was Dartington College, which is quite Michael Chekhov influenced, from what I understand of its history. But his working kind of practice was very collaborative and ensemble and physical based. We did a lot of LeCoq and LeCoq-like work over those 2 weeks, and I absolutely loved it. And then looking around at drama schools, I saw the Collaborative and Devised Theatre course at Central, and I went, oh, that sounds like it's got all the things I want. And did the rounds for a few years and got various free calls but didn't get in, and then finally got in on my third year of attempt to the course that I initially wanted, which was very fortunate. It was definitely the right course for me, because I can get very stuck, and I think this is another reason why I'm drawn to physical work. I can get very stuck in my head. I fall into kind of an intellectual analysis of things very quickly, and sort of end up being a bit disconnected from my body or from the actual kind of presence of the now. And so working in an explicitly physical or psychophysical and body-led process was a good counterweight to that kind of tendency.
That's fantastic. So as somebody who does enjoy movement but I don't think will, feels more comfortable with text work as opposed to physical stuff, even though I wouldn't say no to it, of course not. But one thing I have experienced is there's a liberation that you find with movement, isn't there? It's like, you have like if you do LeCoq or you do Larval, there's like this liberating feeling of you can just throw yourself around the room, you can throw yourself in and give ideas to the room, and it's okay to screw up. And if you throw something in and it completely falls flat on its face, but it's the joy from that as well, and I think it's essential for an actor to just get involved in that every now and then, just get that energy out of your system and just enjoy failing and feel that it's okay to fail. I mean, would that be a fair thing to say, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an important mindset for any actor. In obviously, rehearsal processes in the UK can be very time constrained, and part of that kind of working culture leads us to want to find the answer. And I think working with text as well, again, it sort of leads us into quite a kind of rationalizing or working out the kind of absolute logic and understanding of the scene, which is perfectly valid and has lots of good stuff to it. But it does, we do lose out on other possibilities by doing that sometimes, I think, and having a more open approach to, I don't know what's going to happen, let's try something out. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, but what would it be like if we did that and then that? And then it's a different approach to doing the same thing. But it does give you a wider palette of what this might mean, or what show you're making, or who your character might be. And those sort of surprises can be a lot more rich sometimes than what we can come up with rationally.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So in terms of LeCoq himself and your experience of him, with his movement and everything, what would you say was his objective, or where do you think he's coming from? What's his unique message or unique way of working with movement that sort of put him on the map in a way? What do you think is his unique? What is the uniqueness of him, and what is he trying to say, do you think, with movement? Do you think
unique's an interesting word, because I think it's similar to the philosophy of a few other. Well, ultimately, I think it's the same as any kind of practice or resource or approach or process, which is ultimately trying to give you tools as a performer to be able to live in the present moment and make interesting work, explores the human condition in some form or other. I think what occurs with LeCoq and again some other practices, but very much starkly in contrast to more specific process practices, if you like, where you do this, you analyze the text in this way, and then you do make these sort of choices and you answer these questions, which is again very useful and brilliant process itself. But LeCoq doesn't give you a kind of pedagogical aspect of this is how you will be an actor. It's more, here's a language to explore what being human is, and some tools that you might choose to use as a maker, but ultimately it's your artistic responsibility. I can't remember his exact quote, this will be a very much paraphrase, but he would say something along the lines of, I'm not teaching you to be this kind of actor or that kind of actor, I'm teaching you to be artists and to make the theatre of tomorrow and not just regurgitate the theatre of today or yesterday or what I've done. Which is why I think you have a really huge kind of proliferation of LeCoq trained graduates in lots of different contexts, whether that's someone like Toby Jones, who works in a very sort of a lot of screen work and does do some surreal, absurd and comedic things, but also very naturalistic things. And then you have companies like Complicity, who make very kind of bold, physical and devised work, and gives you a range of working in different contexts rather than just, I will be purely the naturalistic screen actor.
The naturalistic screen acting. Well, what do you think? When it comes, actually, no, we'll come to that question a bit later. One of the things two things actually that you've talked us about is what LeCoq calls le jeu and the étude. So le jeu is the game, right? And étude, I've forgotten what that stands for exactly.
And really, it just means a sketch or an exercise, or it kind of derives from music. Like a musical étude would be a piece that's written specifically to practice or focus on a kind of an aspect of technique or practice. So I kind of slightly prefer that to the word exercise, because exercise, I feel, either gets us in the mind of like, we're going to do 20 reps, or we're going to answer question 3C on the maths paper. Whereas I feel like, an étude is a form that you explore quite openly and you see what happens.
Yeah. And le jeu, well, how would you describe LeCoq when he wants to play the game of, play le jeu?
That would be the quest that you're always looking for as a performer, or as a performer, finding the game. What is it we're playing at this moment in time? I guess there's an aspect of that which is, again, avoiding a fixated, this is the thing that we're absolutely doing. It's more, instead of saying, I'm going to walk 3 paces towards you at this point in the script, it's, we're going to play this game of working out what the distance is between us and what happens when I close it off like this. And I'm going to play with the rhythm of those 3 steps. So that even if the form is, I'm going to take 3 steps, I'm finding what is the game in that I can play. Otherwise, I'm just repeating something that becomes a sort of dead, empty form that has no kind of life to it. Whereas finding the game of those 3 steps brings you life, because you're a human being actually playing a thing, which is what we do all the time. And games could be as simple and banal as, how am I going to play with the rhythm of each of these steps? Or it could be something like an objective, which is itself a game. It's just a sort of more psychological and complicated, or perhaps sophisticated version of a game. So yeah, the game is what we're always searching for, however it might express itself. Yes.
Interesting. So what do you think that because I remember we had one session one week where we looked at, I think it was 2 people got up and did their Shakespeare scenes for us, and I'm interested to know, how do you think LeCoq works with text? How can he help people with text in a way, even though he is movement based? Is there that connection between his work and actually working with a script?
Of course, I would say, partly because the meaning of the text itself changes depending on the context, and part of that context is the space that's between us, how we're physically in relation to each other, the physical kind of story, for want of a better word, that our bodies are telling, like that informs what the text means, or what the story that the audience receives is from what's going on. And partly, so many of his tools are brilliantly imaginative ways of getting out of your head and finding, again, unexpected choices, or more interesting choices than I'm going to do it this way. It's what is the, you could use elements, or as we've started to look at, or games like fixed space or relationship in space, push and pull. But all those dynamics of movement are just as important in text, both in playing a scene, and again, the physical aspect of that, which relates to the text, but also text itself, and the spoken word is a physical action. So I in some ways, I don't see much of a distinction between them. There's obviously very specific and important technique when it comes to voice and vocal practice, but it is also fundamentally a physical act as well. So all the tools work together.
That's great. And another sort of strand of LeCoq's already very wide web, I suppose, is the use of mask. And there's two things, like there's the neutral mask or the anti-mask. So I think I'm going to get these confused. I know I am. But and so a neutral mask is when you actually do wear a mask with one type of emotion on it, and then an anti-mask is when you just use your natural expression. You don't wear a mask at all. Is that right, or am I getting that completely wrong?
Unfortunately, there are lots of different definitions of masks from different practices and practitioners. The one that I work with, which I think is pretty purely LeCoq based, and through the kind of lens of John Wright, who was my mask and clown teacher, and Ali, who was my neutral mask teacher. Neutral mask is one particular, very specific type of mask, which is built off the noble mask, which is made by an Italian mask maker whose name is going to escape me very frustratingly, but who was a very close collaborator with LeCoq. And he developed the neutral mask as a training tool above all else. The neutral mask has it's not devoid of expression. It's not like those sort of blank white plastic tacky masks that you can get. There is still an expression there, and it's sort of potentially lightly noble, but it's not not as in aristocratic, but noble as in yes, noble.
Noble. I am above you.
Not so much I'm above you, but more like everything's okay where I am. And as a tool, mask in any form draws attention to what's going on in the body, because the face becomes a fixed point. With the neutral mask, because there is very little and limited expression in it, it takes off that kind of layer of character or characterization that we can often obsess with as actors. And with that, a level of kind of emotionality. What is it I'm feeling, and what is the feeling of this moment? And by doing that, the neutral mask allows you to focus on the clarity and purity of the action itself. So what is the essence of climbing a mountain physically? What is the essence of existing in a space that's closing off as I delve deeper into the forest? Or what is the pure, uncolored, or kind of characterized or emotionally laden action? And when am I doing too much physically, and when am I not doing enough to communicate that? So that's kind of what the neutral mask does. Obviously, we've not been able to work with the masks themselves in the current circumstances. It is very frustrating. But there's a whole other range of other masks. There are larval masks, which are quite strong, and they're quite, how to describe a larval mask? There's few and specific characterized aspects of it. Like there might be quite a particularly large nose, or they're sort of not overly human, but they have human elements to them, and they're kind of quite naive, and they convey quite sort of specific, strong aspects of potential character or expression. And then you also have more specifically character-led masks, where the faces becomes a bit more human but still fixed. And with those, you're looking at both how can you find the physicality of that expression or the character that mask suggests, but also how can you, through your body, change and develop that sort of mask expression. Like how can you make the mask that's always smiling also feel like it's crying through your body? And sort of in tandem with that, I don't know if maybe this is what you're referring to with anti-mask, but there's this idea of the counter mask, where you play the opposite of what is sort of on face value. So again, if you have that sort of happy smiley mask and you're playing the counter mask of it, then you're physically and in the context that you're setting up trying to explore perhaps the tragedy or something that is in opposition to it. Or I think I spoke in one of our classes a little bit about one tool LeCoq proposes is to describe your character in a normal place or a situation with 3 different adjectives, and then to choose the opposite of those adjectives as well. So my character is wise but idiotic, and warm-hearted but blunt, whatever juxtapositions you might find are useful. And by finding those counterpoints or aspects of countermask, you create a more whole and 3-dimensional being, because we are all those things. We can all be happy and tragic, and happy in our tragedy and sad in our happiness. And the human condition is never one thing, it's everything in between. So that gives you a scale to play across rather than just one single idea, which is also more interesting to watch, because as an audience, when you go, I see the idea you're presenting me, great. Then what? I've got it now. I'm just sitting here for 3 hours whilst you continue to tell me that Hamlet is whatever. I need more than that. Otherwise, you're wasting 3 hours of my life.
Yeah.
And of course, humans, we're never stuck in one thing. We move all the time.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it'd be like to sit through Hamlet and he's showing one emotion the whole way through rather than having that. Oh, if it was like grief-stricken for the whole time, oh God.
Just brooding constantly. Oh.
God, that'd be a nightmare. Of course, I think it's already a challenge for an actor playing Hamlet to find that diversity in that. And I think, with LeCoq's teachings, I think that would be a really good way of finding that. I've just used the word diversity before, but that what's another way of saying it? Like stretch, so show your whole palette of emotions and what you can bring to the table, like the full picture of who this man is, as opposed to just, yes, he broods a lot, yes, he's grief-stricken, yes, he's sadness, but he also finds that method in his madness, and we would get that sort of fun aspect from him as well, from his antic disposition, I think it's called. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it was Simon Callow in his book Being an Actor, who talks about one principle that he sometimes employs is to, in the very first scene or the very first entrance with a character, you can land their sort of initial the most obvious thing that you would think about that character, Coriolanus's strength as a military leader. You come in, bam, there it is. And then the rest of the play, you don't go back to that. You explore every other aspect that you can in juxtaposition to that, which is, I guess, one way of doing it. That doesn't have to be how you might do that.
Oh, massively, yeah. That's really helpful to actually hear that, as well. Because yes, you start with one thing, but then it's like, okay, you start at base camp, which is like this warrior of Coriolanus, and then you go up the mountain and you realize he's not like that all the time, is he? He has vulnerabilities, he has weaknesses, he has a very strong dedication to his mother, and it's like there's so much to it, and it's incredible.
Whilst I remember on masks as well, I've just there's also within that same world of practice, there are half masks, which are when you have half the face covered and your mouth is usually the part that's revealed. So there you're sort of starting to navigate between still playing in your body, but having more expression on your face. And those masks can be quite specific, and very closely related to those are commedia dell'arte masks, where you have specific characters associated with a specific mask. So yeah, that you sort of explore those different levels of character and characterization, but you start from that place of the neutral mask of what is the story in the body, because again, as actors, we get sucked into playing the obvious thing on our face. We want to be understood. We want people to know that we're felt or feeling.
Emotions kept in the body as well as the mind, isn't it? But do you remember that exercise we did with the Shakespeare text, again with the two guys who got off and did Romeo and Juliet. It was, I think I wrote something down here. You gave us like a briefing of at the end of half term. It's something to do with tension. It was like the tension in between the character. I think you've already mentioned it before, but there's I think you said to both of them, like, to stop doing a scene, but just find the physical parallels or physical boundaries in between the two of you and find the tension in the space. I did write it down. I was listening to you. But
tension in the space sounds about right.
Yes, as body's articulacy becomes less when identifying a fixed point, playing with rhythm of impulses, space, our relationship to it, push or pull towards, away from people, emphasize, I can't read my own writing, accentuation, that's not even a word, of the working in opposition dynamic being pushed and pulled. So yeah, there's an exercise of Juliet trying to get away from Romeo, but Romeo was pushing towards her, and yet there was this lovely tension in the space of wanting to go somewhere and not wanting, and the other person pushed him away. So was that something that LeCoq wanted to engage with as well, as the tension in the space and the physical dynamics of something which you can't see but do exist in between two people?
Very much, and push-pull is one of the aspects that LeCoq talks about as a dynamic of space in particular. And space is very important in Lecoq's work, partly because just as we read the story of an individual through the shape of their body as much as anything, we also read the story of a space through what the space is physically and how that is defined. And you can create a sense of space physically based on how you would respond to that space. Again, small space, what does that do to me physically? But another big part of space is the people in the space and the things in the space and what happens in between them. And saying I love you as you step towards somebody is very different from saying I love you as you step away from someone. Those things could mean all sorts of different things, but they are different. And even if you speak it in exactly the same tone or the same kind of manner of speech, the meaning changes because the space and relationship to space is different. With that exercise, rather than sort of specifically saying you're going to push her away at this point and then you're going to do that, that is again a kind of etude which allows the actors to explore the dynamics that's going on between the characters, or what the dynamics might be. Again, it doesn't have to be, it might be that it's wrong, or you go, only this bit was useful and the rest isn't useful. But those two characters can move towards each other or away from each other. They have, in one version of the exercise, you have to keep a fixed space, so it has to be 3 meters or whatever it might be. And in another version, there's no restriction of how much distance is between you, but you have to be listening and responding to with a sort of focus on that relationship in space and the tension between you in space. And it gives you a lot of different possibilities, because in that scene, the balcony scene, there's you can use that as a way to, as a kind of physical analogy of the game that Romeo and Juliet are playing, which is something in between flirting and seducing, and also, is everything going to be okay because we're dealing with this crazy political situation in which our parents hate each other and the world might kill us. So there's sort of a lot to navigate in their circumstances. And also it can be useful as a way of starting to stage a scene, and you can work that again in opposition or alongside the text on the same sort of level. Lost my train of thought. What have I missed out? Tell me what I missed out.
It sounds like a tricky game between Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a mixture, right? There's that it's very physical, that falling in love is a physical thing as well. And there's that literal pull that we use words like being pulled towards somebody, or the magnetic attraction, like there's that pull of coming together. But in that scene, there's also the absolute physical reality that one of them's on a balcony, one of them isn't. And they can't come together, because if they're caught together, then, well, Romeo is probably going to get killed. So there's literal, physical, and non-literal dynamics going on in between them already, but there's also that very real pull. And do they want to act on that? Do they not want to act on that? And that exercise gives the actors a very specific focus, frame, and language with which to kind of try and navigate those dynamics with. I really want to come towards you, but I can't, so I make the choice to step away from you. Now I've stepped away from you, I can feel that I really do want to come back towards you, but now you're coming towards me too quickly, and we have to slow down. It allows you to explore all those kind of dynamics without doing that intellectualization. It's physical, it's in the body, it's there.
Yeah, and I think Shakespeare gives you that as well, doesn't he? You know, in that scene especially, so, when Romeo says, "I take thee at thy word," and Juliet goes, "No, go away." And it's like, who is this? Well, not go away, but it's like, right, what's going on? And it's like, I want to be with you. Oh no, go away. And then suddenly you get this tension there. It's like, oh, okay, what's happening here? Are they in love, or are they trying to get away from each other? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But then that blossoms into this lovely, into the love story, which it becomes, and it's fascinating.
And again, it's like with the countermask exercise, in a way of, it gives you, again, a polarity, a spectrum or a scale to play along. Like, they're not just in love, they're not just being pulled towards each other. There is that push and pull between them of, can we be together? Do we want to be together? Should we be together? Should we not be together? Leave me alone. You should go for your own safety.
Yes, think of your safety. I'm pushing you away.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you also talked about earlier about the specifics of LeCoq, like when you see, like when you, as you said, when you're climbing a mountain, you know, you find the specifics in the way that you move, or and everything like that. Because one thing that I've really enjoyed in our classes is the imaginative journeys that you've taken us on, and you use your imagination to find this the specificity in the movement. So I think we started off in, and I know we climbed the mountain, but I think we started off in, oh God, where did we start? It was the episode we went through a river, we went up a mountain, and then we came down the mountain, and then we ended up in the desert, and then we fell asleep in the desert. That was the end.
The fundamental journey. You start in the sea, you end up on a beach, you move through a forest, you climb a mountain, you reach the summit, you descend the mountain, you cross the river, you end up in the
that one. And obviously that helped to really engage with encouraging the specifics of mime, and to really find the elements and see them and visualize them and feel them and even smell them in a way. So I get, was that, so the imagination complex of that, is that something that LeCoq is, well, I think on the surface, I suppose it's a bit of an obvious question really, but he's looking for that the imaginative engagement at 110%, and then that's when you find, like, you know, another exercise we did was, you have a desk in front of you, and like, if picture obviously it's easier for me now because I have a literal desk in front of me, but it's good to find okay, so remember like the weight of it, remember like, okay, so we've got a notepad there in the corner, we've got microphone here, we've got some bizarre dolphin in the corner, so I don't know where that came from, but it's finding I suppose the imagination is also like one of the foundations of LeCoq. Obviously it's not just movement, but it's actually finding that experience. You see that mountain, you see the river, you see your desk in front of you, which enables you to get to where you want to go and get fully engaged with the work. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's, again, as with any of these sort of etudes, again, there's a lot of different lenses that you might apply to it. So definitely on one level, there's the imaginative rigor and the level of imaginative immersion that acting like demands in a lot of ways, even if that's in a very kind of banal circumstance where you just have to pretend that there isn't a camera this close to your eye. and still communicate and perform your action as if that wasn't the case, or that you love your co-worker and actually you, on a personal level, you don't get on very well, or vice versa, or whatever it might be. As actors, even on a very sort of pedestrian level, our work is rooted in imagination. And then when we're trying to create a sense of space and worlds that aren't in the black box in which we're playing, then that imaginative rigor has to be so much more. And to create the level of detail consistently of, I have no props, I'm going to create for you the sense of my bedroom, or of Romeo's experience standing outside underneath Juliet's balcony. Like, where is the balcony? I have to know exactly where it is to see it, for the audience to, through me, see where I see it. And if that changes without that being a conscious choice, or without that being theatrically useful, then the audience are going to be like, well, what's he looking at? I don't know. I don't understand where the balcony is. If it's very high, if Juliet lives on the first floor or at the top of a tower, it's a bit all over the place. I don't really understand. So there's that level of imaginative rigor. There's also a big aspect of LeCoq's work at finding inspiration in the natural world. As humans, we've evolved in relation to the natural world, and these days, obviously, we live in some big, tall urban buildings and urban centres a lot of the time, but we have a very embodied knowledge of the world around us. A lot of our language refers to physical acts and natural acts. You feel your heart dropping into your stomach, for example, or you might describe someone as a bit of a mouse, or they spoke with a tidal wave force, or whatever it might be. There were much better analogies than that. But we often look to kind of metaphor to describe our experience in life anyway, and we do that in relation to the natural world. And again, that can be a useful way to escape a kind of fixation on logic and reason that diminishes the possibility we have, or gets us fixated on one idea, and then we try to perform just that single idea. And then again, we're in a one-dimensional kind of plane of character and human experience, rather than the full multifaceted aspect of it. But because we have that metaphorical relationship to the natural world, we can draw inspiration from that for building character, or building a story, or building a scene. We do that anyway as human beings, so it's just kind of explicitly built into LeCoq's practice. And then, like you say, with the fundamental journey is a kind of, in the place of LeCoq's pedagogy, quite a fundamental point. It's like a culminating point of the physical and technical rigor of, like you say, how do I, that sort of the mime aspect of, figurative mime aspect of what is the size of this trunk that I'm moving around, and what is the resistance I need in my body to actually perform that action. Again, the essence of moving myself around, or lifting this branch up, as opposed to this little light branch that just gets in my face. So there's the physical rigor, there's the imaginative immersion. There's also, in the fundamental journey, a sort of a sense of dramaturgy. You have those fixed points along that journey. There's the relationship to space. Again, what physically is different when I'm moving along an expansive beach, as opposed to standing at the top of a huge mountain. There's another version of it as well, which maybe we'll get to in the future, which I personally call the fucking mental journey, but that's not an official terminology.
That sounds really interesting, though. Well, what is this fucking mental journey?
It's the same dramaturgy, but the stakes in each location are much higher. So the sea is a tempest. The forest is on fire. When you're descending the mountain, it's an avalanche. The river is a torrential flood. And the challenge, so the first version of the fundamental journey is again focusing on the essence of action as you traverse these different spaces, not character, not emotion. There's no kind of joy in reaching the summit. I just reach the summit, and that is what it is. That is what, like for the neutral mask, there's no conflict. There's no sense of the past or the future. It's pure present with the action, and as clean and pure a way as possible. And that challenge is heightened so much more when you try the extreme version of that, because you still have to focus on the essence of the action, but because the circumstances are so much more intense, it really reveals when we as actors overperform or get stuck in, like, I have to feel terrible because I've been tossed around by this tempest. For the neutral mask, that doesn't matter. They've come through the tempest still, and your job is to focus just on the essence of that, of the action. And again, it also clearly demonstrates when you're not doing enough and when you're a bit timid in your choices, or unfulfilling the physical reality of being tossed violently in the story.
Wow, I look forward to doing that fucking journey at some point. Being swept around my attention. I thought you were going to say being chased by a bear in the forest or something like that, but the forest is on fire, which I suppose is equally as scary, I suppose. But then again,
but again, it's not scary for the mask. The mask just has to deal with the situation.
Interesting. The mask has no. Well, it does have emotion in a way, but it knows how to deal with the situation. Like, it has emotion, but it doesn't show it.
It's more that there's no conflict for the mask. It's just completely in the present moment. The present moment is there's a fire around me. It's not about the future of I might be consumed by the fire. It's just there's a fire around me. That's
it. This was just the reaction. So yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, I'm just looking at some of the notes here, actually. That's sort of a lovely lead on to, you talked about presence and finding and actually this is quite a good lead on, actually, finding your peace in the moment as well. It's like, there is a fire around me, yet there is a sort of peace as well, because you're going to get out of it. We're not going to get scared. We're not going to get over, we're not going to get over dramatic about it, if you pardon the expression. But there is a way of finding peace in the moment, how I could come into the moment and engage and listen to it in an embodied way. So would that be the neutral mask as well? Is performing things in an embodied way?
Yeah, very much. I think all of Lecoq's work would focus on performing things in an embodied way, but the neutral mask allows you to focus on the purity of that, or the essentialism of that. And then on top of that, you can start to layer in changes of rhythm or aspects of characterization. You can increase the drama if you like. But we find that blank canvas of the action in its essential form, and then you kind of compose around and on top of that.
That's really interesting. Oh yeah, this is awesome, man. So yeah, I've just got a couple more questions before we finish up today, if I may. So one's more like I'd like to call it a philosophical question, but hopefully it does at least sound like one. But is there, with Lecoq's work, with everything we talked about today, is there only so far you can go with it, do you think, or is there an infinite array of possibilities that movement can open up for the actor in the way that they perform? Or is there
I think there's the only limit is the extent of the human condition. Because we are embodied creatures. We have a body, and we live and experience the world through that, and even our kind of consciousness is rooted very fundamentally into our body, and our physical understanding of each other is rooted into our body. Sort of have a lot of interest in the kind of development of neuroscience and the cognitive sciences around the body. Not that I would claim to be an expert in any way, but reading about mirror neurons and how that we learn to interpret other people's actions through mapping them into our own understanding of our physical body through these sort of mirror neurons. So the limits of what we can do as actors through the body is the same as the limits that we have as human beings, I think. Which is maybe a bit pretentious, but But again, as with any practice or process, it's all aiming for the kind of communal exploration of the human condition. That's why we have theatre, is we're fundamentally communal creatures in one way or another. We derive our sense of self based on the others in our tribe and in the world around us. And I've been reading recently The Body Keeps the Score, which is a fantastic and fascinating exploration of the body in trauma and in response to trauma. And it shows very clearly how the sort of sense of self can be defined by your relationship to other people initially. Why did I start talking about the sense of self again? Because we were talking about the limits, that's right, the limits of working physically or in an embodied way. So I went off on a tangent. However, I think fundamentally there's no limit with that. And LeCoq proposes and provokes rather than, again, offering this is what it must be. And even within each of those provocations is a whole huge world. Like, we've been working on the elements a little this term, and fire has a whole spectrum of what that might be, and there's a whole infinite amount of shade as to how we might use that as a metaphor for human behavior or human stories. So yeah, there's no limit. So if you're not focused on the body in some way, you don't relate to the body, then I don't know what that is. Even when you're doing radio work, the voice that is recorded comes out of your physical form, and I don't know how that can be other.
How else that could be, really? Yeah, that's fascinating. You said something really interesting there. It's like LeCoq teases and provokes rather than saying, well, I'm going to probably get this wrong. Teases and provokes rather than telling you that's how it should be. And if I know you have a website, you could put that on the top of your website, just around the top, to sort of be like, I think that sums it up really well, actually. You are provoked and you are teased, but there's no specific way of doing it. So that opens up to the freedom and everything of the room. And yeah, I just think that'd be a nice little quote to have on your website. Of course, and it's yourself as well.
I keep that in mind. I think that's true of we have all these great practitioners and theatre directors and so on, but all of them were engaged in the same set of questions of trying to unpick what is it that makes good performance or interesting performance in the context in which we're alive. And there's even practices that have quite a set process, or we see as having a very set process, Stanislavski is an obvious example, and I love Stanislavski's body of work. It's brilliant. But his process, both artistically and in training, transformed massively over his lifetime, and in response to the knowledge he learned and the knowledge of the society around him, the kind of cultural context. And I think we limit ourselves if we have to only emulate that process rather than continuing to question it and come back into questioning it. So a process that does tease and provoke allows you as an artist to start asking and figuring those questions out for yourself, and hopefully find better ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last question today, if I may. Is there a story that you have from your own personal experience of working on stage where you were approaching a part or approaching a specific moment, and there's a roadblock in the way, and there's something that's not quite working, you don't know how to unpack it, but you went to the work of LeCoq to try and figure it out, and then and then that roadblock was removed, and you were able to get through it in a way. So I suppose really, was there a moment where, or moments in a way, where LeCoq has helped you in the rehearsal room to get past obstacles in the way?
I mean, pretty much every process.
Yeah.
I think partly I often use animals or aspects of elements, or I just use a lot of that language in every day in rehearsal, really. So it's always doing that. I find animals can be very liberating for building a character often, because then you're not necessarily focused on trying to kind of understand what would the character do next, because I don't fully know the character, because there's quite a sparsely written play without very much history or backstory sort of sense. There's only so much I've gleaned, but rhythmically in the text I get the sense that they're a fox or a kestrel or whatever, and then I can play with that animal and see what that does instead, and learn through that. If I'm going like, I just can't understand what they did 20 years ago that makes them say this line, or I find it very helpful when I have to encounter emotionally laden events, because often the tendency as an actor is to want to play the emotion or the emotional state, which is just not really consciously possible, really, or something not very easy consciously, and it's easy to just impose and present an idea. So instead of thinking I have to cry at this point, I can focus on the physical sensation of collapse and drop. Well, there was one particular example in a play I did a couple of years ago, and it was a remount of a production we'd done before, actually, and there was one moment that I'd never quite sort of found what the expression of the event was, but this character lost all of his money in a catastrophic kind of social event. This was set in the it was a 1933 Ukrainian play, technically set in sort of not specifically described bit of time and place in Poland. And my character lost all their money, and their whole life dream had been about getting themselves out of poverty and out of, as that character would describe it, the common muck, to rise above, and had dreams of having his daughter sort of marry a member of the aristocracy. And a big part of that was being able to buy out the factory that he worked for. And he'd saved and saved and saved, and then everything crashed. And I hadn't quite figured what that moment was. And in the second time we did that production, there was something about that event was given a lot more time on space as well, to kind of, for the impact of it to land. And it was taken out of a kind of naturalistic moment as well. So I could just have this really long, slow, Suzuki-like walk across the stage, in which, coming from this sort of upright moment of almost victory to then the slow collapse. And the emotion came out of feeling the physical journey of collapse over a long and painful amount of time.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it was satisfying.
I mean, in terms of like artistic, in the most artistic way possible, find that collapse, your emotions on the outside, but inside you're going, it's working, it's working, it's working. It's working. Yes. Okay. Look. Okay. Sad. Yes. Sad. That's a lovely parable, actually. Contrast with like happiness inside, but sadness on the outside. Quite interesting.
The actor's dilemma.
Actor's dilemma. Yes. Brilliant. Wow. Well, this has been an amazing conversation to have with you. Thank you so much for your time today, Matt. I've really enjoyed it. It's been so interesting to hear about LeCoq from a different perspective, and I suppose everyone has different experience or different way of thinking about his work, but it's been really interesting to hear your side of it today, so thank you for that. Yeah, sure. So this is this has been me, right? I've lost talk. I can't talk anymore now. This is brilliant. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Matt, if you just stay on after I finish recording, I'll say goodbye to you, albeit face to face, but on the computer screen. But anyway, I'll say goodbye to you personally. But yeah, this has been the Uncensored Critic. Please like and subscribe, and I'll be back soon. And once more, Matt, thank you so much.